So I'm like, suddenly. Hi, my name is Evan. My pronouns are they, them. I am the director of youth programming at Trans Family Support Services and a non binary person. And I'm here with a collection of other non binary people to chat a little bit about coming out because coming out day is coming up. That's that word a lot of times, but coming up day is going to be arriving on our calendar soon. And as non-binary people, we experience this event maybe many times. Maybe we do coming out once and it changes and evolves over time. So I think we have a neat little perspective on what being out means and what that process of sharing with others looks like. So we have a few other voices who get to be a part of this conversation with us that we're going to be sharing with you all today. So to get us started, let's go around and do introductions. Let's do names and pronouns and tell me something boring about yourself. I can go first with a boring thing about myself. My boring thing is that I really do not like the taste of cilantro. And my boyfriend is infuriated by it, but I do have the soap gene, and that's my boring fact about myself. And I will pass it off to Dan.
Well, I'm Dan. My pronouns are they, them. What's boring about me? No, nothing. I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. But if we're gonna get boring, toilet paper must go over the front, cannot go over the back. Okay, Alex, you want to go?
Sure. My name is Alex. My pronouns are they, them. I guess the boring thing about me is I grew up and still live in Alabama. I mean,
Hey, hometowns always get to be boring. That's like
yeah,
the nature of a hometown. So awesome. Perfect.
yeah. And then I'll pass it to Luna.
Hi there, I'm Luna. My pronouns are they, fair, they, them, and ella. Um, and something boring about me, all I can think of is that I'm allergic to strawberries, which I really don't like. I still eat them, but it's not it's not good. Um, and we have Aspen left.
And I'm Aspen. I use they, he pronouns. I am the Director of Operations for Trans Family Support Services. Something boring. I only read nonfiction, and a lot of people think that's real boring. So
I love it. I love it. Those were all perfect. I had someone recently in an icebreaker was like, coming up with a fun fact feels like a lot of pressure. So just tell me something about yourself, and it doesn't have to be interesting. And I just really like that idea. So if you're watching this, tell us something boring about yourself. And Luna, also, I just have to say, my sister has a citrus allergy, and it does not stop her from eating orange and grapefruit and lemon all the time. And so you are not alone.
Yeah, it's strawberries and raspberries. It's something to do with the red pigment, and they're so yummy. I can't not, like so hard, but
That is just your burden to bear in this life.
yeah.
Okay. I love it. So great to meet some of you. Well, no, I'm not meeting any of you for the first time, but like to see some of y'all after a good slew of not seeing you, and to see some of y'all I get to see really frequently. Um, I know that within my own little circle of trans and queer people that I know, the language that we use as non-binary folks changes greatly, and like our interpretation of the language changes greatly. So another thing that I would just love if you could all answer is, what identity terms do you personally use, and can you define them to yourself, right? So like, I know we have these broad general definitions of identities, and maybe your definition is in alignment with those broader definitions. That's totally cool. But I just want to know, what do these words mean to you, and what words feel right for you? And this time I will start with Alex.
Yeah. So for specifically for gender, I just use non-binary. When people ask me to explain that, as people are wont to do, right? When you use something as broad as non-binary. I will explain myself as androgynous. Like, I feel like that's the interpretation of non-binary that works best for me. Um, just somewhere on a slider between masc and femme. Um, yeah.
I always like to think of like, you know how most people think of gender as the one slider. I like that you use the one slider because I think of it like a D&D alignment chart. It's
Yeah, I
like,
like to think of it as like the color spectrum, like when you
yeah,
look at a
yeah,
like a true not the color wheel, but the actual spectrum. But I feel like when someone asks me what non-binary means, I need to start at the 101, and 101 is the slider, and then 201 is the alignment chart.
yeah.
So yeah, at least for like the intro, like we'll just go with androgynous, and then I'll tell you more as we get to know each other. It's kind
It's
of
like, okay, you know boys. Okay, great. You know girls. I'm neither.
Yeah.
None of those. Luna, do you want to share a little bit about what language you use for yourself?
Well, like non-binary also, just as like a general, like, well, not, because when I tell people I'm trans, also they'll be like, also, um, so what do you identify as? Are you a man or a woman? Is always a question I get. Well, I'm like, well, neither actually. I'm like, okay. Um, but I remember seeing like the spectrum thing, and when I was first like learning about my gender, I would see that, and it helped me make sense because I would say like sort of in the middle, but leaning towards feminine, so somewhere there, and that's how I discovered Faye as an identity and as a pronoun, because that's how it was described to me, and it just sort of was the first time that a pronoun made sense and like an identity made sense. So but for me, I don't really experience gender as a straight line. It's more of like kind of what you're saying, like the color spectrum, but I see it like sort of spherical and universal and expanding in all different directions and just changes. I like the word fluid to describe my gender because I feel like it's something that is constantly changing and evolving, and I'm still learning about myself. And so it's just this thing that I feel free in that language, that I can just sort of change and express myself however I want to. I like that.
I love that piece of like I feel free in that language. I always tell cis folks that like as a trans person, I feel like I personally, and maybe y'all resonate with this as well, but I understand myself in a way that cisgender people will never know themselves. And that's something that I feel is very liberating. So I resonated with that. I liked that a lot of like this language is freeing. It's good.
Yeah, totally. Feels good.
Dan, tell us a little bit about your language.
So, like everybody else here, I'm non-binary, but yeah, my flavor of non-binary. Well, I'm going to back up to. I remember when I first was kind of wondering, am I non-binary? I started my journey with, I don't want to wear those clothes. I want to wear something different. I want something a little bit more color in my wardrobe. And I don't know if that's really what I wanted or if that was the easy one to grab. But I remember talking with you, Evan, and asking about non-binary. And I came away from the conversation with like, wow, it can be anything I want it to be. And I described it to someone as like the wild, wild west. Like there are no rules when it comes to non-binary. It's like, oh, which it's taken me some time to kind of sit with that, to kind of realize that, oh yeah, you could be any way you want. So I think for me on my non-binary, I'm probably more on that slider. And I think I was originally targeting androgynous, and maybe I'm now slightly more femme side of androgynous or targeting. I got to, there's the vision I have in my head and what I've got to work with, right? That's just the way it is. But yeah, I think for me that concept of it can be whatever you want it to be it's a little scary, but it's also very freeing, and I think that might help me with another version of it later on to know that you can, right? There are no rules.
Okay. Yeah, I always tell folks like my whole piece of settling into my gender, I guess, less of the initial discovery and more of the like finding my sanctuary within it is this piece of like I just do what makes me happy. Like I just do what
Mm.
feels good, and who's to say that that means one thing or another? It's just what brings me joy. I love it. And what language do you use?
Listening to everyone speak, it made me get a visual of like my big sphere will be like queer, so and then inside of that there's trans, and then inside of that there's genderqueer. So like, and it depends on, of course, who I'm like speaking to. So like queer gets the easy one, and then trans is also an easy one for me, and then genderqueer becomes more where I like live, and that's how I initially came out um, in 2009, and that's kind of where I floated back to. I went really far on the masculine side for a while because I had to obtain like I wanted medical in transition to a certain extent, and it was back in 2012, so that was difficult to do in the South. So, but I have floated back to genderqueer, so it definitely speaks volumes to me that I always say it's very flexible and like fluid, and gender in itself is like a fluid and a journey for each individual. So yeah.
Do any of y'all, because I know so like I I I tell people like in stacks, right? Like I'm trans and within that I'm non-binary and within that I identify as agender. Do any of y'all have like micro labels that you use within that? Like how one person might use like bigender or something like specific to mark your gender, or does non-binary feel like the word?
I do. So I definitely like identify as queer as well, and then like non-binary. Like non-conforming is another one since like high school. I feel like that one was like the first label that ever felt right, where I was like, yeah, I don't want to be what you're telling me to be, and I just knew that I wasn't like other people. So it just sort of that one for a long time, but more specific ones. I like femme a lot, and then fae or fairy fits really well. It's one that I have to explain to people when they ask, what does that mean? Um, so yeah, that's the other one that I like a lot.
I was going to ask because I saw you use they pronouns, and I know a lot of our youth, we're starting to see more and more youth who are identifying with what some people might call like uh, xenogenders or like neogenders, and one of them being fey gender. So I was going to ask if that's language that you use for yourself.
Not neogender. I've used like neurogender as like a so like it's like a way of describing the way you experience gender as like sort of a really cerebral experience, something that exists within yourself, not within society. If that makes any sense. But yeah, it's sort of like I don't know. I feel like for a long time, my feelings about gender were very very much isolated, and I didn't really feel like I had community for a long time. So it sort of became this like um, I don't know, abstract thing that only existed to me and in my own head. So you start to feel like sort of like a mythological creature, like you don't exist, and people just tell you like, oh, that's non-binary, is just something people made up, it's just a story people tell. And I'm like, well, so are fairies, but I feel like one. So I don't know, it sort of just makes sense. And then the more I read about fae as an identity, I've heard it also called like demigirl, like it's sort of similar in that label. I've also just heard it being fluid from feminine to androgynous or neutral. Sometimes I don't feel like gender even exists. It's just this like abstract concept. So the concept of being able to flow from that, from feeling feminine to not feeling gender at all, really really resonated with me. But yeah, I've having worked with youth, I've definitely related to a lot of the new terminology that they're coming up with. It's really interesting to see. I like it.
Yeah, I feel like when I was coming out initially, and I came out in 2014, so we definitely were starting to see more visibility. I think that was the same year that like Laverne Cox was on the cover of Time. Um, but the only language that I had was androgynous and non-binary, and it's really cool getting to work with these kids and seeing the words that they make up for themselves. Because like before I did this work, I was a linguistics focused archaeologist. I love language and how language works. Um, and to get to watch the new age of language actively happening is it's awesome. And it's also really validating as a trans person who didn't necessarily get to experience the same language. And I'm glad other people are having that experience too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
My thoughts on trans and non-binary is I remember I came into the queer community through my two daughters, and as I remember when I first learning about, I was getting my gender 101, and that concept of trans or queer being an umbrella term, and then there's other terms underneath it. So I want to say theoretically, or by someone else's definition, because I'm non-binary, I'm trans. And I remember initially, I'm like, I don't know, and there's in my head, there's pushback on that, and I think it was probably because I'm like, well, but I don't want to transition. And then at some point, someone I was doing some stuff with my insurance, and they said, yeah, you're not seeking a binary transition. I'm like, oh, yes, because I'm different than I was several years ago. So I have transitioned, just not on a 1 to a 0, not in that binary scale. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. So there's that. But I think the other part for that for me is that um, this journey is mine, and no one else gets to say what it is. Just like yours is your journey, and it gets to be defined to my terms, to my definition. So if I'm going to define trans or non-binary or whatever in this way, that's Dan's terms, and that's really powerful.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And we get to, that's the cool thing about like working within this community is getting to engage with other trans and non-binary and queer folks, and there's a lot of respect, like a lot of mutual respect to each other's own experiences of identities. Um, and I'm always very grateful to the fact that like I don't have to justify Evan's gender to you all, and you don't have to justify your genders to me, and we're just going to accept that we all might think of it differently.
Mm-hmm.
I think the world could learn some things from us. What about
everything is a teachable moment.
Everything's a teachable moment, especially when you work with youth. It just becomes like your second nature is to try to pass apart the wise words. Alex and Austin, any like micro labels or other language that you might use? I know Alex, you said androgynous. Anything else like that?
For like gender, androgynous is about as deep as I feel inclined. And I think a lot of it too is like I'm more inclined to delve into micro labels, and I spent more time digging into micro labels for like my romantic and like how I relate to people. Like those labels felt helpful to me to help kind of describe like what kind of relationship people should expect from me and that sort of thing. So as far as like romanticism and sexuality and stuff like that. But as far as gender, like similar to what Dan said, like but my gender's all me. You're gonna take whatever I give you and just know that whatever's happening here is queer. Um, you know, you and that's about as much as like I've ever felt compelled to explain to most people. But I also love what Luna said about like the cerebral experience of gender. Like that's so interesting to me. And I do think a lot of youth are getting to have that experience and exploration in a way that maybe because like you said, Evan, like when growing up, androgynous was like about as micro label as it got, and I didn't even start my gender journey until I was, into my 20s, despite having come out as gay when I was 14, just because the language in that like that experience wasn't one that was like open to us yet. But yeah, I'm satisfied with androgynous.
I like that you say that's all you're inclined to say, and like all you're inclined to like identify. I love the I don't know the implications of it being an inclination. That's just really that tickles me. That language feels really special to me. Like,
I mean, part of it is like to try and expound upon that because already, like, I understand, like, especially like looking at the root of the word of androgyny, right? And then it kind of already implies there's like male, female, and somewhere in the
mhm.
middle, and then the kind of like, and that's the only middle there is. So like, and part of me feels kind of dated when I say that. I'm like, let me tell you, I'm a '90s kid without telling you I'm a '90s kid, by using the word androgynous, like in earnest. Um, so yeah, so part of it is just like, but I also appreciate too, sort of like being able to trace my history in that way. Um, that isn't to say like anyone's ever too old to explore neogender or neurogender, thing like that. But I mean, part of my history, is like coming to terms with gender and sexuality in the deep South, in the, especially in the early aughts, right? Um, and so, like, I guess I cling to it in the same way that, like our elders still will still say transsexual, even though younger folks are like, well, that's outdated. I'm like, well, no, it's part of the history. It's part of the growth and the development. So it's special to me in that way too. The fact that it's dated.
yeah,
Can
yeah.
I say
I
something
and
really random?
yeah. Go ahead, Luna.
Have you heard the song Androgynous by The Replacements? Because if you
Yeah.
shouldn't,
Oh,
No.
great song.
Okay, they're.
Great
I'm
band.
looking at. I'm
Yeah.
writing it. Androgynous by the Replacements. You said.
Yeah. Laura Jane Grace and Miley Cyrus do a cover of it also with
You had me at Miley
I
Cyrus.
I love
it's a
it.
great cover. Great cover. If you don't know who Laura Jane Grace is, she's a trans punk rocker, amazing singer. Check her out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. All
Against
right.
Me is
This
the
live
band.
stream actually turns into NB's Tell You Music.
Yeah,
She
Against
also
Me.
has a book, and it's called Tranny. It's a good book.
Oh
It is
wow.
a good. Yeah.
we need a Spotify playlist, the
And then
NB Spotify list.
Oh yeah. I've got some
when
fun.
Dan said outlaw for gender stuff too, it reminded me of Gender Outlaws, which is Kate Bornstein.
Yeah.
My head was.
Another good one.
There's so many.
It's a reading list. We got a reading list on this side. The two genders are actually you read or you listen to music. So some of us do
Welcome to
both at the same time.
welcome to being an NB. Here's the reading list.
Yeah. Here's the reading list. Here's your
Your assigned
glasses.
your assigned reading list.
Aspen, what about you? Any micro labels?
I relate to what Alex said heavily.
Yeah.
And then even when Dan went into not necessarily initially identifying with like the label trans and stuff like that, that's how I feel about non-binary, because it was such a long time ago that I was like, okay, I'm genderqueer, and that's before non-binary was largely used as like people were saying I'm non-binary, they were saying genderqueer, they were saying gender fluid, they were saying gender non-conforming. And I have gone back to that, right? So I've gone back to what my root language was. And so I haven't had the experience of using the like identity non-binary with people. Usually I just like say genderqueer because that's usually like when I'm in those spaces, that's what I'm using. And so it's like it's, you just open up new gender boxes, new things in them every day. You won't like something, certain types of clothes, and all of a sudden you try them on like 3 years later and you're like, I look phenomenal, all over the place. Or I didn't, scared of makeup for a very long time, then started doing makeup again and was like really excited about that. So very fluid. I don't know where I was going with that. That's all I got.
No, it was perfect. And I totally get it that both of y'all said, because I get that way about my sexual orientation. My partner, like, I'll describe what my sexuality is, and my partner's like, this word is literally that you just said to me. It's this one, and I'm like, but that one didn't exist. Like, so I'm this one, and I will be this until I settle into my grave. Like, that is, I am on this hill. So I get it. I get it. Um, and kind of related to that, but Aspen, kind of harkening back to something you said earlier with queer being an umbrella label even over your transness. Do y'all see sexuality and your gender identity as intermingling or as connected identities within you, or do those two things, like, do you think of them as separate? Because, like, let me backtrack a second there, because, like, I know by definition they are two separate things, but I know for myself, my queerness feels inherent to my transness. And like, I personally, after having dated cis folks and trans folks, as a trans person, feel like I only want to date trans people. Um, and so for me, these two things do interplay with one another. So I don't know, is that a shared experience for any of y'all, or do any of y'all have thoughts on that?
I can agree with that.
Really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a definitely an intersect there. I mean, it came back to myself identifying as pansexual, but like also even with my gender. Oh my gosh, are you alive? Are you okay?
I'm
You good?
okay. I made coffee and I swallowed it wrong.
Oh no.
I'm good though. Sorry. Keep going. They don't moderate a panel in months and then they come back and this is what it looks like. I'm sorry.
Evan, moderator is supposed to be in the background, not calling attention to themselves, and yet
I just love attention, okay? So that's why I moderate these things. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Aspen.
Where was I going? Okay. They intersect a lot, and I find myself identifying with the label pansexual, and that was after I initially came out as genderqueer. And then I found through my journey in relationships that I tended to gravitate towards other trans and non-binary individuals because of the fact that I didn't have to play or didn't feel like I had to play a specific role in that type of relationship. And I've noticed that even with some binary trans folk, right, there's still role base in that type of relationship, which has been an interesting like discovery that sometimes that that can be part of that too. But yeah, so they intersect, and they also tell me that I just kind of am who I am. So I don't even always. That's why I end up using queer sometimes, because I'm just like, yeah, I'm Aspen. So here we are. Yep.
For sure. I totally relate. And what Alex said a second ago about your label, like letting people know what to expect from you. So that's why I like queer as a label. I also use sapphic as a label because I'm femme and I like feminine people. So, and I like that it's not gender specific. It's just, that I like femininity and I find it attractive. For me, it doesn't matter what your gender is. I just like people who express their femininity or are in touch with it. So that felt like a really freeing label. I used to use bisexual a long time ago, and then would get into like debates about the meaning of it, and I'm just like, ugh, I don't want to have this conversation anymore. So if anyone asks me, I'm like, yeah, like technically, yeah, I am that, but it's not my label, like, so labels evolve, I think, and I think that's awesome. I also use demisexual as a label because it's like non-gender specific at all, and it's sort of like I guess that's like ties into like my feelings of feeling agender, because it's not gender specific whatsoever. It's just sort of about just connecting with people. So I like that as a label as well.
And Alex, did you?
Yeah, coming out as non-binary, like Aspen said, like did end up informing my relationship with my sexuality, like as I start, he's like the whole coming out path was like, it's a very like cliche. I came out as lesbian or came out as bi and then lesbian, and then made the progression from lesbian to, well, I was lesbian for a while. And then as the gender revelations came, I was like, well, lesbian doesn't feel right now, and it never really did. So, but what is it? And especially once I realized that like demisexuality was the one label that I was like, oh, that one. I like that one. That one makes sense to me. But yeah, it took really having the freedom to explore my gender to really understand my sexuality in a way that felt authentic, and find things like demisexual, panromantic. I'm like, bam, that's it, 2 words. And in a way that, you know, really expresses that one is gender nonspecific, right? Because that was important to me too. It was like I really wanted to lean into making sure folks understand, like, one, you know, I'm into all genders, but also, like, I have been with cis folk who I know have cis het men specifically, who I had to sit down and explain, like, I want you to understand that, like, I am queer. This isn't like a woman light situation. Um, you know, and having these labels to sort of explain things kind of help drive home sometimes. Like, what, you know, that despite all outside appearances or whatever, like, this is going to be a queer relationship, you know, at least on my end. And yeah, and being able to reframe non-binary. I also had a similar experience with bisexual too, and having, right, the great bisexual debate. And eventually it's just like, I don't want to argue even within the community about it anymore. So I'm just gonna break it down further.
Yeah, that one was
Alex, you're bringing up something that I thought was kind of interesting, was the the progression that you made, you know, from this to this to this to that, and because now that I've experienced that, I've lived that. There's there's so many different reasons why that might be. It could be that you aren't ready for what your truth is. It could be that you're not in a space where your truth can be out, and you just need to tamp that down. It could be that you don't have the language or the possibilities. And I know for me, language and possibilities were 2 big things, right? So as I explored that with my daughters, and as I learned, I'm like, oh, you mean you could be this way, and that's okay, and that's a possibility. I thought you could only pick between these 2 flavors. Like, actually, no. But I didn't know that, right? Now, I I officially turned old the other day, so I'm by far the oldest person in this room, right? Um, and I've lived, you know, all of these years in the binary, and, you know, growing up, I was born in the '60s, so there we go. Someone could do the math on that one. Um, so yeah, that definitely, you know, finding that language to step out of the binary, that's part of mine. But that basically, it's complicated. It's always complicated, isn't it?
Yeah, it always is. Um, well, it's so funny, Alex and Luna, that you were like, demisexual, because that's the one that my partner's like, you know, you're demisexual, right? And I'm like, it's not a word. Awesome, cool. Okay. So switching gears a little bit, I always struggled throughout my journey, and now I feel like I'm finally getting to that place. But what does, like, presenting authentically to the rest of the world, what does showing up authentically, what does that look and sound like for you? And that could be things like Luna talks about, you know, with the Fae pronouns, of finding the Fae pronouns feels like a way that they can be more authentic. But how do we express our authenticity? And especially, like we've all kind of touched on, how do we express our authenticity knowing that sometimes it's not well received? So kind of 2 questions there, but if anyone wants to take that first.
I can take it a little bit. Kind of touching on what you said a little while ago about doing what feels good. As someone who experiences gender in a fluid way, you know, I kind of just, sometimes I want to feel more feminine. I want to wear more makeup. I want to put lipstick on. I didn't wear lipstick today because I didn't feel like it, you know. But if I felt like it, I would have, you know. If I, you know, felt like wearing a skirt, I would have, you know. But, you know, it's just whatever feels good. I wake up and as I'm getting ready for the day, I just kind of stop whenever I like what I see, and it's just sort of, yeah, whatever feels good that day is what I do, whatever comes naturally to me, and comes out of me that day. And then just as far as being around other people, yeah, there's definitely like a sort of like, all right, take a deep breath and just go for it, like gotta, just be brave for myself and just go out there and not really care what people say. I went through that for a long time of feeling like, oh God, what are they thinking? What are they thinking? What are they thinking? They must not like me at all. They're judging me. Everyone hates me here. And then I just like went, it got to a point where it was so overwhelming I couldn't function, so learning to silence those voices was a big part of me being comfortable with myself, and just being able to be authentic was a challenge, just feeling like it's okay to be authentic, like, okay, now what does authentic even mean, and I feel like I'm still learning about myself and feeling that sense of freedom. So this was a question that I kind of like thought about for a while, and I felt like it's really important. But I feel like the biggest thing is just allowing yourself to just do what feels good, and just saying like, I don't care what anyone says, this is for me, this makes me feel good, and I want to feel good, so I'm going to do it.
I love that. And it reminds me of like Aspen mentioned, makeup used to be a scary thing. And I know, and Aspen, I'm not sure if you relate to this, but as a person who was assigned female at birth, feeling like any sort of indicator of femininity feels like a concession or feels like a defeat, in the view of the larger like cisgender society. And so, Luna, as you were talking, it's kind of like this piece of, there was a lot of the joy kind of sucked out of self-expression, out of clothes and hair and makeup, because of this pressure to present myself in the way that would, what I thought would cause others to respect my identity. And eventually you get to a place where it's like, they'll respect my identity or they won't. And it has nothing to do with anything that I could have done.
Right.
And so I'm also starting to do makeup again, and my partner's starting to wear makeup again. And the first time they wore eyeliner in front of their mom, she was like, "Are you detransitioning?" And like, you walk through these pieces together, and it starts to feel so much better than forcing yourself to present in the way that you think others expect you to present. And I just think that that's a really cool. That's what I was thinking about while you were talking.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that, because I've just recently gotten comfortable with expressing masculinity, because it's something that I really shied away from for a long time, until I had a conversation about it with someone who's also non-binary, and they're like, well, I'm masculine, but I'm not a man. Like, I'm masculine in a non-binary way. And I was like, huh? Like, I was like, I can be masculine and still be non-binary and still be queer. Like, yeah, I'm masculine, but like in a queer way, like in a non-binary way. And it was like, oh my God, it was so freeing. Like, so yeah, I can wear t-shirts again. It's it's great.
I love it. I love it. Anyone else want to share a little bit about that? What does presenting or showing up authentically look like for you?
For me, being authentic is addressing my fears so that I can present and be the way I want to. And Luna referred to quieting the voices, and I'm just going to say addressing the fears. So I recently had a time where I addressed some fears and I didn't even know that they were there. I'm like, afterwards, like, oh, that was a non-event. That wasn't even an issue. It's like, oh. And then all of a sudden it's like, this weight was lifted. It's like, oh, well, yeah. Now, that's not to say I'm not afraid of things, that I don't have fears, but I've addressed a big chunk of them. And that's going to allow me to go from Dan 2.0 to Dan 2.5, and then maybe that could pave the way for Dan 3.0, right? So addressing those fears, and are those fears, am I going too far? What's my family going to think? What's work going to think? And yeah, so that's me. That's my authenticity, is addressing that.
Yeah, 1,000%. Like, a large part of the authenticity comes from learning to push through the self-doubt, because like Evan said, there's nothing I can do that's going to convince everybody. So I may as well just do whatever makes me feel good. But I'll be real, like top surgery was huge for me. There were like, and of course, as I was getting planning for top surgery, I had folks asking like, "Oh, are you transitioning in the right, like from 0 to 1, right?" And I'm like, "Well, no, I'm still non-binary, but there are like this is something that has been incredibly important to me." Um, that was huge, but and I had to like reassure like my family, like, but that's it though. I'm not thinking about anything else right now, which is like, but even if I do down the line, like y'all are gonna have to deal with it because that's
Right
gonna be
right
my
now,
choice.
right now,
Um,
yes.
and another thing that's been hugely important is, and took a long time to learn, right, is self-advocating. Um, like I know, like if I walk into a space and I'm like, these are my pronouns. Do not call me this, that, and the other. Don't call me ma'am. Um, you get 3 strikes, and after that, I'm going to assume you're not feeling it, and then that's just where our relationship is going to stand. And just being really assertive about self-advocating has been huge because then I know I can eventually I can establish spaces in in communities. I'm very fortunate that my workspace is one of them, which is one like something not a lot of people get. Um, and it was a lot of it was walking in and insisting like this, these are my pronouns. This is how it's gonna work. If we want to have like more than just a dull professional relationship, I'm gonna need this from y'all. And everyone was like, yeah, got it. And so I know I can go into this space now and by and large just like be myself, because I was able to advocate. And obviously that takes a long time. Like I think back to myself from 10 years ago and I want to be like, someday it's going to be easier. Like you're going to be able to look someone in the eye and go, my pronouns are they, them. Do not call me she, her again. you know, um, but yeah, that's been significant. And especially once you get that buy-in from other people, right? Then they'll advocate for you too. Um, and being really cognizant of not settling. You know, um, I know it's hard, especially if you're a recovering people pleaser, to just want to kind of let it go. Um, and there are instances, well, you have to, right? Again, I also work in public service. I can't educate every patron I work with. I'm not going to come out to every patron I work with. We don't have time for that, and it's not necessarily safe to do that. Um, so you being able to let that roll off my back while also establishing a relationship, with folks that I know I'm spending time with, um, makes it easier to then deal with like getting called young lady or whatever on the desk, because that's what happens when you're in the South. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, and it makes it easier for other folks to navigate advocating for you too. Because now I know I have coworkers who will correct other people's pronouns, because I've been very, you know, insistent upon enforcing my boundaries.
I think, can you say, I think how I started showing up, I mean, it was a hard journey for me of coming out and then wanting medical like transition, but also knowing that, especially in the state of North Carolina, you could not do that unless you were out as the other binary uh, gender, whatever presenting as male. That's what they called it for me. In order to get the things that I wanted medically and get them covered by insurance, or attempt to get them even covered by insurance, right? Or even get a therapist, like for them to take you serious. So I went way hard. And I remember having discussions in my head with myself of being like, okay, you can't wear bracelets, you can't wear rings anymore. Like that, to that extent of trying to shove like I remember walking behind people, trying to practice how they walked, because they walked more masculine and all that different type of stuff. Um, and then have slowly unpacked that since moving out of those type of situations and been like, okay, am I still happy with my medical transition? And the reality is that I am, but I also come off extremely masculine to most people, unless you're like talking to me. I've had one of my friends describe it as like you come off really like masculine and then you open your mouth, or like you start like expressing with your arms so much, right? And so like my gender expression doesn't always come out through like the things I wear or the makeup or anything like that. For me, it comes out in a lot of how I relate to other people and other individuals, how I relate to my family. Like I'm in our, in our culture, it's not particularly normal for brothers to be really touchy feely or anything like that. And I'm very huggy with my brother. I make him give me piggyback rides because I'm tiny, right? And so like my gender expression comes out more so how I relate to other people. And I think the reality is it's like it's so buried inside me. Sometimes I feel like it's not seen remotely because I don't know how to express it in like I don't want to change anything about how I look. I'm happy, but I also still identify as genderqueer, which can be battling sometimes inside of me. So yeah.
I really love that. I want to do a whole like additional panel with the cohort of us and talk specifically about things like medical transition and what that means for us as non-binary people. Because like I'm not a person who's medically transitioned at all, and that colors people's perspectives of like what my non-binariness means, and if I'm allowed to identify as transgender because I've not medically transitioned. Um, but I'm also recognizing the time, and so maybe I can convince the organization to just put on another non-binary panel, and we could talk about that part itself. Because I have one final question, and it's one that I think is really important. And back when I was hosting our panels and moderating our panels on the regular, it was always the question I ended with because we just don't talk about it enough. And I'm starting to see that change, and I'd like to think that we're a small part of that change. But what gives you joy in your gender? Like I said earlier, right? That piece of I know myself in a way no one who has not had my experience will know themselves. I'm connected to myself and my partner in a very intimate, special way because of my transness and because of their transness. And that brings me like gender euphoria. That brings me trans joy. Um, so what's that for you all? What brings that for you? And Aspen, you've gone last the last couple of questions. So can we start with you? I know it's kind of a big question, but
Yeah.
you got an answer?
Yeah, I had an idea in it. I mean, because I just got off of talking about the expression. And so, like, the biggest part of feeling at home in my identity and what brings me joy in my gender expression is being able to tell myself that it's okay to express myself how I want to. Um, so whether I'm in like on a date with someone or I'm talking to a friend, not doing any more monitoring of my body language or like monitoring of how I'm presenting, just being able to be just Aspen, which comes out as a mix of, you know, man and woman and everything in between. So I think that's where I find joy in that, and that being okay for the people that support me around me.
What about you, Dan?
Probably a two-part. It's my ability to relate and empathize with others. I understand so much, and connected to that is that I could be an example. I can, it's like, yeah. Now you're saying that you think it's too late because you're 30. It's like, right? Like, hold on, hold my coffee, right? I got this. Yeah, I think that connection with other people and that understanding that I get from that's huge for me. I absolutely I appreciate that. And when you said that, I started thinking about that. I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely feeling that, right? That's important to me.
How about you, Luna? What's gender joy, gender euphoria? What is that for you?
Um, well, a lot of things, being in spaces like this where we can all like relate and anything I say isn't come across as like totally abstract and people don't think it's nonsense. I feel very validated in this space. So that feels amazing. Um, but yeah, like I have been medically transitioning for 3 years. So like that's had a lot of personal growth for me. Like just the way I think, the way I feel has changed a lot. So that brings me a lot of joy, being able to express myself, seeing my own growth. But the first thing that popped into my head when I saw this question was, whenever I'm in public, and I feel like when I'm in public, I'm very like visibly queer, and someone will notice me and then compliment me, because I feel like it's sort of this like, just like, hey, I see you. And someone will just go like, hey, nice earrings, or I love your hat, something like that. I'm just like, yeah, and I'll compliment them, and it's like, yeah, I see you, and they see me too, and it's just like this cool little moment with a stranger, and that brings me a lot of joy when I know like we can just sort of, like hype each other up in public spaces, and that feels good.
It's like the little like wink wink nudge nudge of like visibly queer. And it's a big part of why while I present more femininely and I get read a little bit less queer now, I always dye my hair fun colors again now that I'm presenting this way, because it's like gay people know that like if 8 out of 10 times if someone with yellow hair shows up, that person is fruity in some flavor. And so I get that, and I love that.
Yeah, it's like, for me, it's like bracelets and shiny jewelry and I don't know, different stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, my sister, her whole thing to like visibly demonstrate her queerness is she has a tattoo of a lady with a sword, and she's like, only a lesbian would get this sort of tattoo there, right? And I'm like, yeah, dude, like that's what that is. What about you, Alex? What is your gender joy?
I mean, yeah, I will say top surgery has been the big one. And partly because I mean I got that in January, so I haven't even hit a year yet. It's still very fresh, very new. But like especially, when you have relationships with folks who see you as woman light, or I even had a partner who left me when I came out as genderqueer at the time. And I was so nervous to tell my current partner, like, hey, this is a thing. And immediately her first response was, when we hug, our hearts will be so much closer now. And I was like, I'm gonna cry forever now. Yeah, like she literally, and I was like, oh my God. And to have like that sort of experience along with my first major surgery ever, was huge. And it continues to be huge, because now, when we cuddle or when my cat lays on my chest, like I just think my heart is so much closer to everyone I told now. And that's been significant. And then also like related to Dan, I love that you've been mentioning your kids, because like another thing that brings me so much joy is I facilitate a teen board game group at the library where I work, and so many of them are queer. And like I think of the teens as like a queer cohort, right? Because before that we had a group of queer teens who come to the library because it's a safer place to be than even at school. Like both high schools have a gender sexuality alliance, but there's still a certain amount of like, oh, but peers could see me and out me and all of these things. And to see the next generation of youth like coming out and like being so free to explore themselves, like so openly and with each other, like I mean, like it's so big, and it means so much then that they come in this group, and when we get a new teen, they're like, oh yeah, that's Alex, they're whatever. And I know like the kids are all right, how much joy comes from that. As well. And the opportunity like with TFSS and stuff to like generational relationships and keep building on that. I mean, I do genuinely get so much joy.
Yeah, the ability to have that. I mean, like Dan mentioned, the ability to empathize deeper and the ability to relate deeper, like you just said, Alex. This work, this community, just the sheer piece of identifying outside of man or woman, it lends itself to an incredible network of human connection. And I'm very grateful that I got to be a part of that with you all tonight. And fully like sitting here, I don't know if you saw my face go red, because I was like fighting with my tears when you said what your partner had said about your top surgery. That is like the most beautiful thing. But
She's a good one.
You can have a good cry once we're done.
I was gonna say, like, I'm gonna be thinking about that. That was so beautiful, and like, I also agree that your partner is probably a good one. Don't know her, but she's good. That's awesome. So, same time next week, we'll do another one. We'll talk some more. I'll get our marketing team on it. But it's, I'm watching the sky get dark in my background and all the lighting change in my room, and recognizing that it is time for us to say goodnight and to say goodbye. But I cannot express enough how grateful I am to all of you for hopping on tonight, and Aspen being the star team player that they are, and hopping on even though that's not what was initially planned for the evening. So I appreciate your flexibility, Aspen. Alex, Luna, Dan, thank you for your honesty and your openness tonight. I'm not kidding. I'm gonna make them do another panel that we can talk more about some of these things, because like, we deserve it.
Let's do it.
But yeah, I guess we'll leave it there, and have a wonderful rest of your night. Thank you all so much for hopping on, and I will see some of y'all very soon. But the rest of y'all, I will see you when I see you. Have a good night. Thanks for
Okay.
listening.
Bye now.
Bye.